Welcome back. You're watching Your World at 10. Now, this is the penultimate day for India to get a brand new set of takeover regulations. Today is the day that the Takeover Regulations Advisory Committee, headed by Chairman C. Achyutan, submitted its set of recommendations to SEBI, that is the market regulator. Now, key to those recommendations is the fact that the trigger for substantial acquisition of shares has been shifted from the existing 15% to 25%, and it will be accompanied with a mandatory minimum open offer of 100%, that's versus the existing 20% open offer that is operational right now. And it is this recommendation that is likely to draw the maximum amount of opposition from corporate India. So joining me to discuss why the committee recommended 100% open offer and whether it's achievable or not for corporate India in the constricted financing environment that we survive in, I have with me Kaushik Chatterjee. He's of Tata Steel, of course, but he's also a member of that Takeover Recommendation Advisory Committee. And I have Cyril Shroff, leading lawyer in the country, managing partner of Amarchand. Mr. Shroff and Mr. Chatterjee, thank you very much for being on Your World at 10. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Shroff, because I'd like you to play the offensive, so to speak, in this discussion. Really, is corporate India going to appreciate this move to 100% open offer? I understand that it gives all minority shares a fair exit, but is it going to be achievable considering that bank financing for M&A is difficult to come by in this country?
Menka, I think firstly there's an intellectual side to this and then there's a practical side to this in corporate India.
Okay.
To the extent that we are moving towards a more international, global takeover regime, I don't think you can really quarrel with the fact that all shareholders should be given a uniform exit. I think that's one of the guiding principles that has been enshrined in the new report. So a higher threshold and 100% offer intellectually fits in with that theme, I think, very well. So I would sort of give full marks to the committee on that. Now let's take the practical context and put it in where corporate India is today. Firstly, I think it's a very different corporate India than it was in 1997, where promoter shareholdings were much lower. So the fact that 25% has gone up, I think, is logical. There are many promoters who have shored up their holdings in this last 10, 12 years, and their comfort level is much higher. In fact, Tata Group itself, which Kaushik represents, is a very good example of that model. Where the challenge is going to be is in relation to the need now to make 100% offer.
Right.
Financing, I think, is just one of the problems. It is, of course, the most important one. And there are various parts to it. One is onshore financing. What are the instruments that are available? Who is going to make that change? And I saw a paragraph in the main report that sort of puts the monkey on the back of the other regulators, because it says that there is a distinction on this between Indian and foreign acquirers, and we hope effectively that the other policymakers, say RBI for instance, will have to deal with this. So I wonder whether in the absence of those sort of changes also taking place, or there being at least some roadmap for how this is going to be done, corporate India is going to be quite concerned.
Right.
As to how this is actually going to play out. So that would be my sort of introductory comment, and let's hear what Kaushik says, and then we can come back to some finer points.
The ball is in your court, Mr. Chatterjee, now. It's quite funny, right? Because you are corporate India, and you're the people who are going to face the problem of financing 100% open offers. Yet I'm told by Mr. Achyutan today in an interview I did with him earlier that 100% of the committee actually backed this 100% open offer. There was unanimity. So I'm surprised. How did you manage to put your weight behind this?
No, I think if I were to articulate first what Mr. Achyutan said is absolutely correct. You see, this Takeover Regulation Committee looked at the entire framework for takeovers for the next decade. And I think we are not talking about one period, 1 year, 1 month. And I think it is important that as Indian companies are growing global and they are acquiring companies overseas and they are following the rules of 100% takeover elsewhere, the situation in India is somewhat similar or getting similar to where if I have a strategic value in an entity, one should be willing to pay the price for control. And I think as far as financing is concerned, if I have a good investment story, if the target company is robust or if the acquirer is robust, financing is not so much of an issue. It may be an issue at a point in time, but over a decade or over a longer period of time, financing is not an issue so long as you have a good investment story. And I think the committee has also recommended that the current problem with Indian banks lending for capital market purposes needs to be relooked into. We're not passing the monkey onto the others' back. We're just recommending that that needs to kind of open up, because Indian banks, if you look at comparatively across the world, are in a very strong position and they are least affected by the crisis. Going forward, they can actually allow lending in a manner where takeover activity can get facilitated. So it's not so much of a scare if we have a good investment story. End of the day, corporate actions like a takeover is part of a strategic growth story of any organization.
Mr. Chatterjee, I'm not making the argument that 100% offer is too expensive. I think the limited argument I'm making, and I think Mr. Shroff may agree with me on that, is that it's not about too expensive. If you have a strong balance sheet and you want to do the acquisition, you ought to find a way to raise the money. The question is, banks are limited in being able to finance M&A activity onshore. And so, and there are limits in how much you can borrow offshore as well. So therefore, it makes it difficult, even if companies are fully able to raise the money, whether they can or not. Now, if RBI doesn't do anything about M&A financing, let's say over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, you don't expect, Mr. Chatterjee, that M&A activity might actually in fact reduce in this country because of this 100% open offer burden?
No, because for a very simple reason, that as part of our mode of payments, it's not only cash. You can do exchangeable, you can do converts, you can do listed debt instruments. So there are several other mechanisms other than a bank borrowing whereby you can undertake an M&A activity. So I don't think it's a limited point of whether Indian banks are allowed under a statute to lend or not for acquisition purposes, but there are alternatives which can be used for the same.
All right. Mr. Shroff, does that assuage your fears in any fashion whatsoever? Do you buy into what Mr. Chatterjee is telling you?
To an extent, yes. I think the fact that there are other non-cash instruments that can be used, it definitely assuages part of the concern. There will be practicalities on how that plays out. So I'm hopeful that that will resolve part of the problem. But there is still a fundamental issue of access to bank financing, which I don't think it will be resolved until the RBI takes a sort of a slightly different view on acquisition financing.
So if this does become regulation, in fact, this set of recommendations, do you fear, Mr. Shroff, that M&A activity might in fact slow down because of this burden of a 100% open offer, which might not be easy to finance simply because of RBI's limits on capital market exposures for Indian banks?
I think there will be a pause. I think people will think about it. But equally, cash-rich companies will have the ability to make quick acquisitions as well, because there are a number of companies that are sitting on large piles of cash, and they could be able to move in quickly. Including groups, say for instance, that may have recently sold out and might be sitting on mountains of cash, and they might be able to launch open offers.
Mr. Shroff, the good part of this 100% open offer is that at least that this committee has recommended linking it to a direct delisting method, and thereby allowing companies to say that if I have to bear the burden of 100% offer, and if I do manage to reach 90% in terms of the shares tendered in, then I can in fact declare my intent to delist right before the offer, of course, and delist through this M&A route as opposed to have to go through another delisting process. Does this work for you, the fact that this 100% is linked into the delisting process?
I think it partly works because it does provide some clarity if you're in the 90% plus territory, but there's still a lot of ambiguity on whether there's a distinction between a new acquirer coming in cold, say with 0%, or a promoter, and there seems to be almost a bias against an existing promoter wanting to delist by going all the way up to 100%. So I don't know what the rationale for that is, and the voluntary offer would take them up to 75%. So there seems to be some sort of conceptual disconnect there, but to be honest, I haven't read it in detail enough to have a final view.
Mr. Chatterjee, would you like to come in on that and explain how you expect this 100% offer to seamlessly fit into the delisting process, and maybe answer some of the doubts that Mr. Shroff had as well?
Yeah, I think when we first made when one of our recommendations was that 100%, the question was what happens for delisting. And I think if you really look at it, in India we have this issues of different regulations monitoring or managing different situations. So there is a delisting guideline at this point of time which is issued by SEBI. Now we are addressing through this committee the issue relating to takeover if it reaches the 90%. And therefore, we are saying it's effectively a squeeze out post 90%. Whereas the SCRR or the listing guidelines requires it is 75%. So between 75 and 90, we still look at reducing it to 75 to maintain the threshold. Or when the threshold changes, or if it is given away, then it's a different matter altogether. But this is a very limited purpose, that delisting out of an acquisition process or out of an open offer process, if it crosses 90, then it gives the flexibility to delist automatically, and that in effect also helps in the financing process, because then there are many financing structures which you can actually leverage the target's cash flows to undertake the whole financing or fund the financing of the acquisition. So I think this delisting need not be construed in the context of the wider delisting regulation, because there is an existing delisting regulation. This is in the context only of a scenario where a takeover process takes place.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Shroff?
Yeah, I mean, the only problem with what mentioned is that it's a bit of a hit and miss whether you land up in the 90% territory or not. So when you start off the process, you don't really know where you're going to end up.
Well, I guess that means you have to make your open offer price appetizing enough for shareholders to want to tender in their shares, considering that there is clearly a tax disadvantage to tender in your shares to an open offer, as opposed to waiting and hoping that the market price will achieve the same level as the open offer price and exiting through the market. But we'll leave that for another discussion. I've just got a minute left, so I'm going to get quick comments from both of you on the other contentious issue that corporate India is likely to oppose, and this is about doing away with the non-compete or the control premium. Mr. Chatterjee, you're going to have a lot of your friends in the finance community call you up and ask you why you actually agreed to do that.
Yeah, but I think if it is only fair to say that if a substantial shareholder is to be paid X, the wider group of shareholders or body of shareholders should also be allowed to pay the same X. And I think that's what exists internationally across many other countries. I don't think that this differentiation between paying a substantial shareholder a certain amount of consideration, A, through the takeover route, B, through some other fees, and denying the wider body of shareholders is equity in any right. So I think it is making the whole framework of this takeover regulation recommendation that we've done is to balance all constituents, but is also to make it transparent, robust and fair to everybody.
I agree with you entirely. I'm on your side, but I wonder if corporate India will agree. Mr. Shroff, what's the sense you're getting? Do you think that promoters are really going to throw up their hands in anguish saying, don't do this to us, we're the controlling shareholders, allow us to get a higher price, a controlling premium, so to speak, and lobby out this clause?
No, I doubt it. I think they will agree to it. And anyway, the non-compete fee was really a surrogate for control premium.
Absolutely.
It was a misnomer to start with. But they will, I think, accept it. Because there is a certain rationale to it. They might squeam a bit to start with, but it will settle. So I don't see this as a big issue.
I know Mr. Chatterjee would like to see these recommendations become the final regulation, or else he wouldn't have signed off on them. Mr. Shroff, do you like what you see? Would you like this to become the final regulation?
The final regulation, I need to see the fine print. Okay. And a quick look at it showed me that there are definitely some issues out there which I'd like more clarity on. Okay. But conceptually, I think the report is something I'm happy with.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there. We're out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. We hope to continue our conversation as this report is now open to the public. Mr. Chatterjee, Mr. Shroff, thank you for being on Your World at 10.